A stolen symphony, a dead engineer, and secrets carved into sound. Nero Wolfe and Archie Goodwin face a murder scored in treason and jazz. Where in the world are you listening from tonight? Subscribe so you never miss upcoming mysteries. The night I burned my own record. If I ever needed proof that arithmetic is the dullest form of torture, that night supplied it. I was knee-deep in expense receipts, trying to remember whether the cab to Bellevue counted as business or charity, when the phone rang with the kind of timing that makes a man believe in providence, or at least in interruptions. I lifted the receiver, expecting another wrong number hunting for a girl named Connie. Instead, a woman's voice came through, low, precise, and cultured, the kind that turns even bad news into music. "Is this Mr. Goodwin? Mr. Archie Goodwin, assistant to Mr. Nero Wolfe?" "That depends," I said. "If it's the tax office, I died last year. Otherwise, you've got him." "This is Lydia Vance. I produce recordings for Silvertone Studios. There's been a break-in. Our vault, a master acetate stolen. I need help, tonight." Her voice had the tremor of someone trying to hold panic in a corset. I could almost see the manicure around the receiver. "Tonight," I said. "That's an unpopular hour with my employer." "Please," she insisted, "before morning. It may destroy more than one man's life, perhaps a nation's pride." That line did it. You can't dangle national pride before a red-blooded American and expect him to hang up. I told her to sit tight and give me the address. When she said Gramercy Park, I figured either the case or the lady would be expensive. Wolfe, upstairs with his orchids, was off limits till 11 the next morning. I scribbled a note for him. "Client called." Sounds like patriotism on the rocks, and slipped into my topcoat. The air outside had the consistency of soup that had given up trying to be warm. Fog rolled along 35th like cigar smoke from a bashful giant. I took the Heron Coupe and steered downtown through puddles that reflected the city's insomnia. Gramercy Park at 11:30 p.m. looked like a stage set waiting for tragedy to enter from left. Street lamps smudged halos over iron railings. Silvertone Studios crouched behind frosted glass and brass letters, the kind of building that tried too hard to look respectable after hours. Inside, the lobby smelled of dust, varnish, and last year's applause. A security guard dozed behind a newspaper. I flashed Wolfe's card, said something about private authorization, and got a grunt that could mean yes, no, or indigestion. The third-floor corridor hummed faintly, a leftover vibration from a phonograph needle. The office door was ajar. I pushed it open and met chaos wearing the perfume of acetone. File drawers gaped, papers sprawled like drunks after a brawl, and the recording booth light burned red against the fogged glass. I stepped in. The man slumped over the console wasn't sleeping. He had a face arranged by violence and a necktie that someone else had tightened too far. Blood darkened his collar. One hand reached toward the switchboard as if for an encore. He looked, I thought, like a man who had finally lost his argument with static. I checked for a pulse, found none, and did the thing Wolfe hates, used my sleeve to lift the nearest telephone receiver. It was dead. So, apparently, was the engineer. A faint scrape behind me made me spin. A figure in a light coat darted down the corridor, heels tapping like Morse code. I called out, "Hey, I don't bite," but the elevator doors swallowed her before I reached them. That, I decided, was our red herring for the night. Every case needs one early to keep things lively. I locked the office from the inside, gave the place a professional look-over. On the desk, a spilled bottle of acetate solvent made a shiny puddle. The label on one broken record read only Overture N, the rest scorched away. There was a folder half under the engineer's arm, payroll sheets, names, delivery slips, all neatly useless. I pocketed the top sheet for reference. Not evidence, mind you, just handwriting practice for later comparison. The sound booth smelled of ozone and sweat. The microphone hung askew like a guilty witness. A single light bulb buzzed overhead, flickering to the beat of my nerves. I spent 20 minutes photographing with my eyes, Wolfe's method, though he'd never give me credit, and then called the precinct from the lobby phone booth. When the operator asked for details, I kept it short. Homicide at Silvertone Studios, Gramercy Park. Send Kramer's boys and tell them to bring sympathy. While I waited, I wandered back to the vault. Its door hung open like a yawn after a bad meal. Inside, rows of shellac and acetate masters lined the shelves, everyone labelled except for an empty slot near the centre, number 47A. Someone had cared enough to wipe the dust where the missing record had been. By the time the uniforms arrived, my shoes had absorbed enough acetone to make me flammable. Pearlie Stebbins led the parade, broad as a door and twice as talkative. "Goodwin," he said. "Figures. You never show up where there's coffee and donuts." I tried, I told him, but they'd run out of dead engineers uptown. He didn't smile, but the corners of his jaw twitched. We went through the motions, photos, notes, statements. When he asked what I was doing there, I gave him the honest lie. Client called about a theft. I arrived too late for the rehearsal. He grunted, which in Pearlie's language meant maybe. An hour later, Inspector Kramer himself marched in, trench coat wet, cigar already in combat position. "Goodwin," he barked, "you been running night school for killers?" "Not intentionally," I said. This one enrolled himself. He took a long look around, then glared at me through the smoke. "Wolfe in on this?" "Not yet. He was communing with orchids when the curtain went up." "Keep him that way," Kramer said. "I don't want his fingerprints on my crime scene or my nerves." I gave him the rundown. Lydia Vance, the phone call, the missing acetate. He jotted notes with the enthusiasm of a man writing his own ulcer prescription. "Acetate disc, huh? Must be worth its weight in politics. You hear what was on it?" "Only hints. Something patriotic and dangerous, like a Sousa march with secrets." Kramer snorted. "All right. You keep your nose clean and your boss behind his desk. I don't want to find either of you cutting records." He signalled to Stebbins, who began taping off the booth. I took that as my curtain cue. Outside, the fog had thinned into drizzle. I lit a cigarette, though the night didn't need more smoke, and watched the patrol cars flash red over the park railings. Somewhere in the shadows, a woman's figure lingered, the same outline I'd seen fleeing earlier. When the light hit her face, she turned away too quickly. I made a mental note and another wisecrack for later. Back at the brownstone, the clock on Wolfe's desk said 10 minutes past 2. I hung up my coat, washed the acetone off my hands, and left the note I'd started with a new line added. "Client's missing record found one dead. Suggest we charge by the body." Then I did something Wolfe would call impulsive, and I call preventive maintenance. I poured 2 fingers of bourbon and sat at the typewriter to get it all down before memory went fuzzy. The keys clacked like a tap dancer with insomnia. At 4 a.m., I finally gave up and headed upstairs. The orchids above me slept in fragrant silence, proof that somebody in the house had sense. The next morning at 9, Wolfe emerged from the elevator wearing the look of a man forced to read bad poetry before breakfast. I was waiting with coffee and guilt. He lowered himself behind his desk and said, "You left me a note that implied rash conduct." "It was either rash conduct or insomnia, sir. The lady chose conduct." He closed his eyes. "A client, you said?" "Lydia Vance, Silvertone Studios. 1 dead engineer, 1 missing record, 1 attractive woman who talks like she's paying royalties on every syllable." "Phooey." He poured beer from the sideboard, illegal before noon in his own rulebook, but forgiven by necessity. "You engaged yourself at night without consultation. The fee?" "She didn't mention money. She mentioned national pride." He sighed. "A commodity with no cash value." "Tell that to Kramer," I said. "He's guarding the scene like it's Fort Knox in 4-4 time." Wolfe's eyes opened just enough to show irritation blooming like a small orchid of its own. "You have involved us in a melodrama before breakfast, and that is intolerable. Would it help if I pretend it's brunch?" "Archie." The single word carried the weight of 3 syllables in an implied sermon. "You will, forthwith, prepare a memorandum. Every detail. I will decide whether we are employed or merely annoyed." He reached for the bell cord, and Fritz appeared in the doorway, immaculate, as if conjured from butter and discipline. "Breakfast," Wolfe said, "and coffee for Mr. Goodwin, who has forsaken sleep for adventure." I grinned. "Make it strong enough to wash off regret." Wolfe gave me a sidelong glance that might have been affection wearing a disguise. "Regret," he murmured, "is a wasted condiment." And that was how the day began. 1 dead man, 1 missing record, 1 employer who considered murder less offensive than a missed meal. As I typed the memorandum under Wolfe's watchful silence, I could still hear Lydia Vance's voice echoing through the receiver, smooth and frightened. Before morning. Well, morning had come, and with it Wolfe's fury. But for once, I didn't mind. After all, It wasn't every night you got called to Gramercy Park to start a symphony of trouble. At 10:30 the next morning, the brownstone had the kind of peace that makes you suspicious. Wolfe was behind his desk, buttering an English muffin with the same deliberation he'd used to dismantle a conspiracy. The orchids upstairs were basking in their morning glory. Fritz was humming in the kitchen, and I was working on the delicate task of balancing a coffee cup on a stack of unpaid bills when the doorbell rang. Fritz appeared in the doorway, not humming anymore. "A lady, Mr. Goodwin. Very elegant. She insists Mr. Wolfe will see her." I looked at the clock. If she's selling encyclopedias, tell her to try again at noon. But Wolfe set down the muffin, sighed, and wiped his fingers. "Bring her in, Fritz. Providence insists on disturbing digestion." A moment later she entered, Lydia Vance as if conjured out of last night's fog. She was pale in that porcelain way that never quite means weakness. Her grey suit had shoulders you could measure angles with. Her gloves were pearl, and the black veil over her hat softened the damage grief had done to her composure. She paused inside the office, eyes flicking from the globe to the bookshelves to Wolfe himself, seated like an immovable verdict. "Mr. Wolfe," she said, "I'm Lydia Vance. I spoke to Mr. Goodwin last night." Wolfe inclined his head an eighth of an inch. "Indeed, I regret that he involved himself without my sanction." "That's all right," I said. "If I'd waited till orchid hours were over, there'd have been a second corpse." He ignored me, focusing on her as if the air itself should hush. "You have come, I presume, to engage my services." "Yes." Her voice trembled on the edges but never broke. "It concerns the stolen recording and the man who died because of it." Wolfe gestured to the red leather chair opposite him. "Sit, madam. State the facts with the brevity you deem possible." She sat. The disc was a one-of-a-kind acetate, a symphony by Nikolai Savinov, a composer who wrote for our government during the war, but whose work was later suppressed. He was accused of sympathies. The recording wasn't public. It contained music and something else. Wolfe's brows rose a fraction. "Something else?" She hesitated. "A message. I can't be sure. But Savinov hinted before he died that he had hidden his confession inside the music itself. A code, perhaps words cut into the groove. I was the custodian. Last night someone took it." "That," Wolfe said dryly, "is a singular burglary. Did the intruder also take your caution?" I cut in before she could wilt. "The engineer ended up strangled with his own tie. If that's what Wolfe calls a burglary, I'd hate to see his definition of a riot." Wolfe turned to me. "Archie, spare us your embroidery. The police?" "They've got the place locked down." Kramer himself showed up. That made Wolfe's mouth tighten. "Kramer," he said, as though invoking a troublesome household spirit. "He will be here shortly." Lydia looked up, startled. "Here?" "Madam," Wolfe said, "Inspector Kramer believes that any event on this planet is within his jurisdiction. He is not always wrong." Her gloved hand rested on the edge of his desk. "I didn't kill anyone. I only want the record found before it's used." "Used how?" I asked. "To discredit men in Washington, or worse." I whistled softly. "A symphony that could sink a senator. That's a new genre." Wolfe's eyes half closed. "Music as weaponry. The 20th century continues its vulgar innovations." Before she could answer, the bell rang again. Sharp. Official. I went to the door and returned with Inspector Kramer in tow. He carried the smell of wet overcoat and righteous purpose. "Morning, Goodwin. Where's your boss?" "In his natural habitat." Kramer marched in, took one look at Lydia and grunted. "Figured I'd find you here. Miss Vance, we met last night. You left before we could ask a few more questions." "I was advised to see Mr. Wolfe." "Yeah? By who? Her conscience?" "Inspector," Wolfe said mildly. "You will kindly address her without insult while in my house." Kramer's cigar twitched, but he holstered the temper. "All right, Wolfe. I'll play it straight. Your man Goodwin was at a murder scene. The dead engineer's prints are on the vault door. Hers are inside, and there's solvent residue everywhere. Maybe you can tell me why she's suddenly paying social calls before breakfast." "She is my client," Wolfe said. "That is sufficient reason." Kramer eyed him. "Your client in a murder case." "A theft case," Wolfe corrected. "The murder, though reprehensible, is secondary. A man's life may be worth less than a nation's scandal, depending on your department's priorities." Kramer's lips twitched like he was fighting down a word that would get him thrown out. "You know, Wolfe, Someday that mouth of yours will write a check even Goodwin can't cash. Possibly, Wolfe said, unperturbed, but not today. He gestured toward Lydia. Continue, madam. She opened her purse, extracted a slim envelope, and slid it across the desk. This is a retainer, $10,000. I whistled again, higher this time. Wolfe raised his brows as if the sum were merely polite. You will have 10 minutes to withdraw your funds, he said. If you are deceiving me, I will not be an accessory to misdirection. Kramer barked a laugh. She's not leaving with that money. Evidence may show. Wolfe lifted a hand and silence arrived. Inspector, you are welcome to your investigation. I, however, am not your subordinate. You may stay if you wish to listen, but you will not obstruct. Kramer ground the cigar between his teeth, then exhaled. Fine, I'll listen. And when she hangs herself with her own story, I'll be here to pull the trap door. Lydia's voice steadied. The recording was my responsibility. Silvertone owned the studio, but the acetate was my personal property. I'd stored it in the company vault because I feared theft. Now, it's happened. Wolfe leaned back. What is its significance beyond sentiment? She hesitated, then said softly, If the world hears that composition, it will reopen wounds better left closed. Savanov's music carried certain codes, names, accusations. Kramer snorted. You expect me to believe a hunk of wax could cause an international incident? It isn't wax, I said. Acetate, flammable, fragile, and apparently political. He threw me a look. Stay out of this, Goodwin. Try and stop me. Wolfe's voice intervened again, smooth as cold cream. Inspector, Mr. Goodwin's interjections, though infelicitous, are rarely without use. Proceed, madam. Lydia's hand trembled slightly as she reached for her purse. I noticed her glove left a faint oily streak on the mahogany desk, acetone residue. Wolfe noticed too, his eyes flicked down and one brow arched. Miss Vance, he said softly, that solvent on your glove, where did you acquire it? Her composure cracked for the first time. Solvent? Oh, perhaps from the studio. I touched the desk where the bottle had spilled. Kramer pounced. Or from handling the record yourself before you walked out with it. She stood abruptly. That's not true. Sit, Wolfe ordered, without raising his voice. The word had weight. She obeyed. He steepled his fingers. Inspector, you are proceeding from assumption to accusation without the intermediate stage of evidence. It is a habit unworthy of you. Unworthy? I've got a dead man and her fingerprints. You have confusion, Wolfe said, and smoke. Allow me, in due time, to provide clarity. Kramer blew out a gust of breath. You're taking her case? I am. He shook his head. You never learn. All right, Wolfe, I'll wait for your report. But if she skips town, I'll have both your hides tacked to my wall. He stubbed the cigar in my ashtray, leaving a scar that Fritz would curse later, and stomped out. The door clicked shut. Silence took over, except for the faint hiss of the radiator and the rustle of Lydia's gloves as she removed them. The scent of acetone mixed unpleasantly with the tang of cigar smoke. Between Wolfe's muffins and Kramer's ashes, the room was fit for neither orchids nor human life. Wolfe reached for his beer, poured carefully, and took a slow sip. Miss Vance, he said finally, I believe you, for the moment. Thank you. You misunderstand me. Belief is provisional. So is my patience. You will send Mr. Goodwin a list of all persons who had access to that vault, with addresses and habits. You will not, under any circumstances, speak to the press. I understand. He nodded once. Then you may go. Fritz will show you out. When the door closed behind her, I said, $10,000. That'll buy a lot of acetone. Phooey, Wolfe muttered. Money is trivial. The danger, however, is not. Mr. Goodwin, I anticipate that the record's content is more subversive than she admits. We must proceed with delicacy. Delicacy, I said, after you just insulted Kramer, threatened the client, and charged her 10 grand. He gave me a thin smile. That, Archie, was delicacy. Had I been blunt, she would have fled. Then what now? Now, he said, pulling the bell cord, we eat. Fritz, breakfast. When Fritz appeared with a tray, Wolfe unfolded his napkin with ceremonial grace. I am, for my sins, engaged. You will begin inquiries at Silvertone. Discover who profited from Savanov's disgrace. Right after breakfast? After mine, he said. Yours you may take as you please, I grinned. That's generous, considering the fumes in here. Next time I'll open a window before we start a cultural revolution. He didn't reply, just reached for another muffin, buttered it, and said, Archie, remind me to have that desk polished. Acetone is corrosive, like sentiment. He took a bite, closed his eyes in satisfaction, and the case of the Lost Symphony was officially underway. By the time I reached Silvertone Studios again, the morning had the kind of sun that makes even Manhattan look like it's trying to apologize. Gramercy Park looked less like a crime scene and more like it wanted to forget last night. Inside, the same 6-story mausoleum for music that had seen better decades waited for me. Same lobby, same shellac, same stale smoke, same ego. I signed in under my own name. No point pretending to be the gas man when the whole building already hummed like a vacuum tube. The elevator creaked its way to the top floor, where the offices spread out in a sprawl of gold records, dust, and faded glamour. A secretary with lacquered hair and the smile of a woman timing lunch breaks pointed me toward the main corridor. They're all in today, she said. Lucky you. Lucky was one word for it. The first door bore a brass plate. Milton Gerhardt, conductor. I knocked, heard a crash, and entered to find a tall, thin man waving a conductor's baton like he was fending off invisible critics. His hair was Beethoven gone bad. His eyes had the look of a man who'd been arguing with a metronome for hours. He scowled. You're not from the Times. True, I said, but I've been known to read it. Archie Goodwin, representing Mr. Nero Wolfe. We're inquiring about a record, an acetate of a Savanoff symphony. Gerhardt's mouth tightened. I conduct music, not gossip. Miss Vance should know better than to send, what are you, a gumshoe? Something like that, only better dressed. He jabbed the baton toward me. If this is about that ridiculous break-in, I've said all I intend to say. Some fool technician probably misplaced it. Funny, I said. The misplaced technician turned up strangled. The baton froze mid-air. Nonsense. Not to him, it wasn't. He dropped into his chair, glaring at a heap of sheet music. Savanoff's work is cursed, he muttered. It should have been burned with the rest of that propaganda. Now everyone's sniffing after it because it's forbidden. People always want what they shouldn't play, I said. You didn't happen to keep a spare copy? He looked offended enough to conduct an overture of outrage. A conductor is not a thief. Then you're ahead of most of your profession. I tipped my hat and left before he decided to try stabbing a high note through me. The next door belonged to Toby Rusk, public relations. If Gerhardt was the storm, Rusk was the leftover drizzle. Short, twitchy, and trying too hard for charm, he was rearranging press clippings on his desk like they were tarot cards for bad luck. Goodwin, he said when I introduced myself. Oh, sure, I've heard of you. You work for that big guy who never leaves his chair. What's this about? Lost record, dead engineer. Same night. You handle publicity, so you probably know who hated who around here. He laughed nervously. Hate? Nobody hates in this business. We just retire people. Neatly? Usually. He fumbled for a cigarette. Look, that disc. Lydia was obsessed with it. Said it was genius, a revelation. I thought it was a dirge, but Gerhardt wanted it released to show he could redeem Savanoff. Whole thing smelled like politics to me. He leaned closer. Between you and me, there's talk that the acetate had a hidden message, something Savanoff cut into the track. I've heard. Maybe a dedication to Stalin. He winced. Don't joke. In this town, even sarcasm gets you audited. I gave him my best grin. Then I'll save the punchline for later. Where were you last night around 11? Home, alone. I was listening to test pressings. Ask Diana. She called me at 9. Diana Field? He nodded too quickly. Our secretary. Knows everything. Forgets nothing. Don't let the dimples fool you. I never do. I pocketed a stray matchbook from his desk, stamped with the Silvertone logo, a treble clef. It might come in handy, or it might just light my next smoke, which in my line of work is about the same thing. The final stop was Diana Field, secretary. Her office had more personality than both of the men's combined. She was bent over a typewriter, and the sound of her keys could have scored a jazz number. When she looked up, her smile hit like brass horns. Well, she said, if it isn't the famous Mr. Goodwin. Miss Vance said you'd be around. You don't look like a detective. Don't tell anyone. I've got a reputation for ruining illusions. She laughed, light and rehearsed. What can I do for you? Tell me about the missing record. Her eyes flicked toward the filing cabinet. I type letters, not legends. That's what makes you interesting. I stepped closer. The others say you know everything that happens here. That's flattering and dangerous. I'm a flattering kind of guy. Try dangerous, she said, smiling. You'll get farther. She had nerve, I'll give her that. I asked about the night of the murder. She said she left at 8, took a cab home, and knew nothing until the morning headlines. Poor Mr. Hanley, she sighed. He was harmless, always humming that same tune. What tune? Something foreign, Russian, I think. He said it helped him keep rhythm. Maybe it killed him, I said. Her lips twitched. If bad taste were fatal, we'd all be gone. She turned back to her typewriter, signaling that the interview was over. I leaned on her desk anyway, eyes on a scrap of burned label peeking from her ashtray. The print was half-charred but legible, Overture, NS, the composer's initials. I picked it up with my pen. Mind if I borrow this? It's trash. Most clues are. Her gaze lingered on me. You don't seem like the kind who collects trash. Lady, I said, you'd be surprised what I collect. I left before I said something that would earn me a slap or an invitation, depending on her mood. In the corridor, the phone booth buzzed. I ducked in and answered. Wolfe's voice came through like slow thunder. Archie? Present and accounted for. Describe the premises. Which part? The offices or the egos? The building, layout, entrances, windows, as if for a siege. Planning to storm the place? You'll need a bigger chair. He ignored that. 2 floors, yes? 3 counting the recording rooms. 1 vault, 1 control booth, a lobby with enough cigarette smoke to pickle an ox. Security guard who sleeps on the job and a fire escape that leads to an alley. Satisfied? Hardly. You will diagram it for me this evening. Sure. Shall I include the secretary's smile? It's easily the most dangerous feature. There was a pause. Archie, he said finally, do not allow charm to obstruct perception. Me? I see perfectly. I just like the view. Pfui. The line went dead. I stepped back into the hallway, still grinning. The grin faded when I saw Gerhardt looming at the far end, baton in hand like he'd been practicing swordplay. You're meddling, Goodwin, he said. Miss Vance will regret hiring you. Maybe, but she'll have good company. Half the city's regretted it. He jabbed the air. That music was meant for silence. It carries danger. I'll keep that in mind next time I hum in the shower. He stalked off, coat flapping like a curtain after bad applause. When he was gone, I checked the side stairwell. Someone had been smoking there, cheap Russian cigarettes judging by the stub ground into the tile. Maybe a janitor, maybe something else. The smell lingered like an argument. I spent another half hour nosing through empty sound booths and forgotten demo reels. Musicians leave clues the way cats leave hair, everywhere, but rarely useful. Still, the pattern was forming. A band composer, a conductor with delusions of grandeur, a PR man sweating guilt, and a secretary who could type circles around the truth. Back in the lobby, the same receptionist asked, "Find what you were looking for?" "Not yet," I said. "But I found a lot of people who'd rather I hadn't." She smirked. "Then you're probably doing your job." Outside, the city was tuning up for noon. A cab honked in D-flat. Pigeons beat time on the awning, and somewhere behind me a phonograph started spinning a scratchy waltz. It sounded lonely enough to be an omen. I lit a cigarette, took one drag, and muttered, "Everyone wants to be heard, even when silence would save them." By the time I reached the brownstone, Wolfe would be knee-deep in orchids and waiting for my report. And if I knew him, he'd want it in triplicate, with floor plans. I'd give him those, and keep the memory of Diana Field's smile filed separately, under distractions of cultural interest. Rain and I have an understanding. It keeps falling, and I keep pretending it adds atmosphere. That night, the West Village was drowning in it. My hat brim funneled water straight down my collar, which did wonders for my posture and nothing for my mood. The address Lydia Vance had given me was a 3-story brick that looked like Chopin might have lived there before quitting music for plumbing. I buzzed once, heard a piano chord from somewhere above, and then footsteps on worn stairs. The door opened a cautious 6 inches. A woman's face appeared, slim, intelligent, with eyes that could read footnotes in the dark. Miss Savanoff? I asked. Archie Goodwin. I telephoned. She opened the door fully. Come in, Mr. Goodwin. The landlord doesn't like visitors, but he dislikes the police even more. That sounded promising. Inside, the room had the modest charm of poverty with taste. Sheet music stacked like small fortresses, a single candle burning in a chipped holder, and a typewriter that had clearly given up after its third novel. A kettle hissed on a hot plate, doing its best to imitate a civilized life. She wore a plain grey sweater and a long skirt that had been ironed more times than it deserved. Her hands were pianist's hands, strong, restless, still carrying ghosts of applause. I'm sorry to trouble you, I said, shaking off the rain, but your father's name has popped up in a case involving a stolen acetate. Her voice was soft but steady. Then something has happened. Something, yes. A sound engineer's been murdered. The disc your father recorded, gone. She closed her eyes for a long second. I knew it would come to that. Sit down, please. I took the only chair that wasn't balancing sheet music. The kettle screamed and she poured hot water into 2 cups that might once have matched. My father, she began, wrote that symphony for the State Department during the war. They wanted music that would uplift democratic morale. He agreed at first. Later, he called it treachery to art. Artists are funny that way, I said. They hate selling out till the rent's due. She smiled faintly. He regretted it until the end. Before he died, he said he had left a confession, his apology, hidden in the work itself. A message cut into the final groove. Not words anyone could hear, but something that would speak if played correctly. A secret track, I said. Your father invented bonus material. She ignored the joke. He sent 1 copy to an American colleague, another to me, but mine was damaged in storage. Miss Vance offered to restore it. She promised to keep it safe. She didn't, I said. No. Her eyes lifted to mine, grey and tired. And now someone is dead for it. Do you think it was worth that? Depends who's listening, I told her. Somebody thinks there's more than contrition on that record. Maybe names, maybe evidence. She hesitated. There was a man, weeks ago. He came here asking to buy the acetate. He said he was a journalist, researching émigré composers. He had a foreign accent, Eastern European. He offered $1,000 in cash. Name? He called himself Mr. Cornell. I checked the newspapers. There is no such journalist. $1,000 buys more than curiosity. Did you tell Miss Vance? I did. She told me to forget it, that the record would never leave the vault. Until it did, I said. Her fingers twisted the rim of her cup. You think she's involved? I think everyone's involved until Wolfe proves otherwise. My job's to collect the noise before he tunes it into music. The candle guttered. Rain spattered harder against the window pane. Somewhere nearby, a saxophone bled through the walls, somebody rehearsing for a night that would never come. I asked, Your father, he ever mentioned someone in government who handled the commission? She nodded slowly. Yes, a liaison named Rusk. That rang a bell loud enough to deafen subtlety. Toby Rusk, the jittery PR man from Silvertone. I kept my face still. Did he ever visit you? Once. He said he was verifying provenance for possible re-release. My father refused. Afterward, Rusk sent letters, angry ones. I burned them. Wish you'd kept one, I said. They'd make fine fireplace kindling for a cross-examination. She gave a small, humorless laugh. Do you ever tire of cynicism, Mr. Goodwin? Often, but it pays better than sincerity. For a moment, the silence in the room turned companionable. Then she said quietly, I didn't want my father remembered for propaganda. I wanted him remembered for beauty. I'd met plenty of daughters who inherited cheekbones, I thought, but this one had inherited her father's conscience, and probably the headaches that came with it. I stood, stretching my shoulders. If that Cornell fellow comes sniffing again, lock the door and call me before you sell him the rights to anything. She looked alarmed. You think he'll return? Journalists with accents usually do. It's part of their charm. When I reached the hallway, she followed me to the door. Mr. Goodwin, she said, if you find the recording, listen to the last minute. You'll understand him better than I ever could. I doubt that, I said, but I'll pass the request along to the boss. He likes understanding dead men. They never talk back. Outside, the rain had graduated to sleet. I tucked my collar up and started toward the nearest corner cafe for a cab call. Halfway down the block, I saw a shadow detach from a doorway, a man in a fedora too wide for his head, watching the building I'd left. When he realized I'd spotted him, he turned and melted into the alley. I considered following, but I'd promised Wolfe I'd only risk pneumonia, not bullets. Instead, I memorized the gait, slight limp left side, and the smell of cheap Balkan tobacco that trailed him. By the time I reached the brownstone, it was 10 minutes past 11. Orchid hours, bad timing if I valued my eardrums, but some calls don't wait for flowers to finish blooming. I entered quietly, hoping Fritz wouldn't rat me out. No luck. He appeared from the dining room, disapproval polished to a shine. "Mr. Wolfe is in the plant rooms," he said. "He told me to tell you that disturbing him would be unwise." "Unwise for who?" He didn't answer, which meant both. I brewed coffee in the kitchen and typed up my notes till the elevator hummed. Wolfe emerged, wearing a fresh yellow robe and the expression of a man who's been interrupted by civilization again. He settled behind his desk and reached for the bell cord without looking at me. "Archie, report." I summarized: Elena Savanoff, hidden confession, mysterious journalist, and the Rusk connection. He listened with eyes half closed, fingers forming a steeple that could have passed for prayer if he believed in anything but logic. When I finished, he said, "You went unbidden." "As opposed to what? The orchids volunteering?" He exhaled. "Your curiosity, though commendable, is immoderate. Still," he opened his eyes, "you have performed well." That was Wolfe for thank you with frosting. "I live for praise," I said. "Any deductions, or do I keep wandering in the rain till inspiration strikes?" "Phooey. Inspiration is for poets. Observation, Archie. What did you observe?" "Plenty. Poverty with dignity, guilt with a side order of tea, and a stranger with foreign vowels paying cash for secrets. Oh, and Savanoff's music might have carried coded names." Wolfe nodded once. "Yes, Miss Vance omitted that in her account. Unsurprising. She underplays. She may have underestimated the value of her charge and the danger. This Cornell interests me. We must identify him. Saul Pantzer could trail him if I knew where he went. You will find out." "Glad to, but maybe tomorrow, after the pneumonia dries." Wolfe reached for his beer, the noon chime had just struck, and poured it into the chilled glass Fritz had set on the tray. "You will not die of pneumonia. You have the resilience of an ox and the judgment of a squirrel." "That's affection, coming from you." "It is," he said evenly, and took a sip. For a minute the room was all peace and bubbles. Then the phone rang. I got it. "Mr. Goodwin?" The voice was male, accented, smooth as varnish. "This is a friend of Miss Savanoff. She is safe?" "She's busy," I said. "Who wants to know?" "Tell her Cornell called. She will understand." The line clicked dead. I looked at Wolfe. "Either I'm psychic or that's our foreign correspondent." He raised an eyebrow. "The devil is prompt." Did he sound Slavic? "Like a vodka advertisement." Wolfe's tone hardened. "He will call again. We will be ready." He scribbled a note on one of his yellow pads and handed it over. "Take this to Mr. Pantzer. He is to find this Cornell, discreetly, beginning at Silvertone Studios. I will, meanwhile, invite Miss Vance to a conference tomorrow. There will be questions." "Questions and muffins," I said. "Your two favourite weapons." He glared. "Archie, enough. Record your report in full, then dine." I headed for the typewriter, suppressing the grin that always comes when he pretends not to like me. Behind me, the beer glass clinked softly. Outside, thunder rolled over Manhattan like a bad drum solo. I typed the heading, "Case File, Savanoff Affair." The keys kept rhythm with the rain. When I finished, I read it over once and thought about Elena Savanoff's eyes, grey, honest, haunted. If her father's confession was carved into that record, it wasn't just music we were chasing. It was the sound of a man trying to redeem himself, and maybe a daughter trying not to repeat his mistakes. I shut off the lamp. Wolfe's voice drifted from the darkness. "Archie?" "Yeah?" "You will not return there tonight. I need you alive, not damp." "That's touching," I said. "Want me to wear mittens too?" He didn't answer. The silence carried more warmth than words. Upstairs, the orchids would be sleeping again. Down here, I poured myself a ginger ale instead of milk. One of us had to stay virtuous, and said to the empty room, "Well, maestro, your daughter's tune just got a lot more complicated." Then I filed the notes, turned out the light, and let the rain finish the night's symphony. The phone rang at 8:47 p.m., just as Fritz was bringing in the roast duck. Wolfe's face did what it always did when duty interrupted dinner. It collapsed inward like an offended soufflé. "Answer it," he said, "and dispatch it swiftly." I picked up. Nero Wolfe's office, Goodwin speaking. Kramer's voice growled through the receiver. "Get down to 57th and Lex, apartment 4B. Your pal, Toby Rusk, decided to audition for a morgue slab. Bring your manners if you've got any left." "I was just sitting down to duck," I said. "Can't you arrest someone else?" "You've got 10 minutes. Click. I looked at Wolfe. That was Kramer. He's staging another murder matinee, starring our favourite PR man. Wolfe's fork froze mid-air. "Mr. Rusk is dead?" "That's the rumour. He wants me to confirm it." "Phooey. Go then. Satisfy his morbid compulsion." When Kramer tells you 10 minutes, he means 7. I was out the door in 5, heading through the drizzle toward Midtown. The building was the sort of respectable dump that rented to men who owned more neckties than scruples. Apartment 4B's door stood open. The smell hit before I crossed the threshold. Whiskey, blood, and the sweet chemical tang of acetone. Inside, the lights blazed. Rusk was on the floor near the phonograph, neck opened by something sharp and circular. The turntable still revolved lazily, the arms scratching empty air. Kramer stood over him, cigar clenched. "Somebody didn't like the B-side," I said. "Cute," Kramer grunted. "Now shut up and tell me what Wolfe wanted with this guy." "Dinner conversation, mostly. You've got the wrong idea." He thrust a folded scrap at me with tongs. In smeared pencil, N. Wolfe. "Recognize that?" he asked. "Sure," I said. "The spelling checks out." His eyes narrowed. "He wrote it before dying. That puts your boss close enough for my comfort." "Kramer, if Wolfe killed people who annoyed him, Manhattan'd be a ghost town." Stebbins lumbered in from the kitchenette, holding an evidence bag. "Found this in the heating vent. Half-melted disc, label reads Test Copy 2. Looks like it caught fire." I bent closer. The lacquer was warped. One edge fused into the metal grate. The smell of burnt plastic clawed at the room. "So, somebody wanted to erase music. That's new." Kramer barked. "Hands off." "Relax," I said. "I'm not taking souvenirs." He exhaled smoke like judgment. "Any reason your name or Wolfe's should be mixed up in this?" "Sure. We collect autographs." "Goodwin." "Look, Inspector, you want a theory?" Rusk was scared. He'd been dabbling where music met politics. Maybe he figured writing Wolfe's name would get someone's attention. Congratulations. It worked. He grunted. "You got an alibi?" "For dinner, yes. Ask Fritz about the duck." Stebbins muttered. "Maybe you stepped out between bites." "Then Fritz would have eaten my share. He's an honest man." Kramer glared at both of us, then jabbed a finger toward the door. "Tell Wolfe to stay put. If he so much as sends out a grocery list, I'll get a warrant." "Fine," I said. "But you'll have to eat his duck yourself. That's punishment enough." I left them photographing blood on parquet and caught a cab uptown. By the time I reached the brownstone, Wolfe had finished his meal and his patience. He didn't look up when I came in. "Report." Rusk's apartment, throat cut with a record shard. Half a melted disc found in the vent marked Test Copy 2. He wrote your name before checking out. That got him. His eyelids rose a precise half-inch. Preposterous. "Kramer's already rehearsing the headlines. I told him you were too lazy to kill." "Indolent, Archie, not lazy. There's a distinction." "Tell that to the DA." He frowned, drumming his fingers on the desk. Why would he invoke my name? Maybe he'd mailed you something earlier, said so to his landlady. At that exact moment, the doorbell rang. Fritz appeared with a parcel, brown paper tied with white string, postmarked that afternoon. "From Mr. Rusk," Fritz said. I took it, untied the string. Inside was a smaller box, empty. No note, no record, nothing but a trace of acetone and paper dust. "Well," I said, "either our murderer works for the post office or Rusk shipped us suspense." Wolfe leaned back, eyes closed. "Archie, recount everything you observed. Leave nothing unstated." I did, including the scrap with his name, the melted disc, the acetone smell. He listened without interrupting, which is Wolfe's version of applause. When I finished, he said softly, "Someone seeks to incriminate me. Clumsy, but dangerous." Kramer won't call it clumsy, he's got a corpse and handwriting. He also has logic when provoked. Wolfe reached for the bell cord. Fritz, beer. As the glass arrived, he continued, Mr. Panzer is to locate Miss Vance and observe her discreetly. I suspect the murdered man's attempt at contact failed because he was silenced too soon. Saul'll love that, I said, trailing a woman with expensive shoes and a guilty conscience. Archie, his tone flattened the room, we are not pursuing titillation, we are pursuing truth. Sure, I said, truth recorded and replayed, until someone breaks the record. He regarded me a long moment. A vulgar metaphor, but apt. I sat, typed up the notes while he sipped beer. Outside, the rain thickened again, smearing the city's lights into tired halos. After a while, Wolfe said, You are disturbed. Rusk wasn't my favourite, but he didn't deserve to get sliced by a sonata. And seeing your name by his body, well, that's a twist I could have skipped. He grunted. Archie, you are not accused. If Kramer suggests otherwise, I shall disabuse him. That's touching. What'll you tell him? I'm too dumb for premeditation. I shall tell him, Wolfe said, that your indulgences are many, but murder is not among them. That earned him a grin. Flattery will get you nowhere, but keep trying. He ignored it, studying the empty parcel. This box once held the record. Our adversary anticipated its arrival and intercepted the contents en route or immediately upon delivery. That suggests access, possibly at the postal station, possibly through Miss Vance. Or maybe the killer just had long arms. He sighed. Archie, sarcasm is not analysis. No, but it's cheaper. The clock struck 9. Wolfe glanced at it, then at me. You will telephone Mr. Panzer and apprise him. Tell him to begin tonight. I shall review the catalogue of Silvertone's clients. On a full stomach? That's dedication. He reached for another sip of beer. Dedication, he murmured, is preferable to incarceration. I called Saul, passed the details, and hung up. Wolfe had already started jotting on yellow pads, lines, circles, words that might have meant nothing or everything. When I finally said, You want me to stick around for the midnight mail? He replied, No, go, rest. Tomorrow you will fetch the photostat of that scrap from Kramer, by diplomacy or deceit. Diplomacy first, deceit second? In whichever order proves efficient. I started for the door, then turned. Wolfe, suppose the killer's next record plays our tune. He didn't look up. Then we shall change the key. Fritz entered, collecting plates, the quiet undertaker of our thoughts. Wolfe signalled for the elevator, orchids at 9 sharp tomorrow, as if murder could wait on schedule. I watched him rise, massive and deliberate, and thought, somebody out there was using music as a murder weapon, and now, somehow, we were on the playlist. If sin had a sound, it would have been the saxophone that night. The joint was called the Treble, a smoky uptown club where the martinis sweated harder than the clientele. The ceiling glowed in gilt and cigarette haze, the carpet smelled like spilled secrets. I'd been there 40 minutes, parked at a corner table, nursing a ginger ale that fooled nobody, when Lydia Vance walked in wearing guilt and perfume in equal parts. Saul Panzer had tipped me off. Uptown club, private table, he'd said. She's meeting Gerhardt. Bring your manners and maybe a gun. She didn't see me, but I saw her, alone, calm, too calm. A waiter led her past the dance floor to a side booth hidden by velvet drapes. 5 minutes later, Milton Gerhardt arrived, tall, nervous, conductor's hair looking like it had conducted a storm. They ordered champagne, which is what people do when they're planning betrayal. I edged closer, taking the long route past the bandstand. The music helped, some jazz number that thought it was Gershwin after dark. From my new vantage point, I caught fragments of their conversation between cymbal crashes. Foreign buyers, Gerhardt hissed. State copies must disappear. That was all, but it was enough to turn Wolfe's eyebrows into a full-blown thundercloud when he heard it later. Lydia's hand trembled as she lit a cigarette. Gerhardt leaned in, whispering faster. I pretended to study the band. The singer, a redhead with a dress the colour of midnight sin, caught my eye mid-chorus. She gave me a smile that could melt varnish. I smiled back. It's a reflex, like ducking when people shoot. When Lydia and Gerhardt rose to leave, I drifted toward the bar, close enough to intercept. Lydia brushed past me. Her purse slipped, scattering matchbooks across the floor. I stooped first, pocketed one. Black cover, embossed treble clef. The club's insignia. I've learned never to ignore decoration. It's usually advertising something criminal. Outside, the rain had started again. They stepped into a cab, and I tailed them in another. They stopped 3 blocks away at a brownstone that housed the Continental Society for Cultural Exchange, which in my experience translated as smugglers with better vocabulary. They vanished inside. I waited 10 minutes before heading home, late enough to prove diligence, early enough to keep my health. Back at the brownstone, it was near midnight. Wolfe was still awake, which meant trouble had ripened. He sat behind his desk, massive and motionless, reading correspondence with the gravity of a Supreme Court justice rejecting civilization. "You were gone," he said without looking up. "I'm back," I said. "That's character development." "Report." I gave him the rundown. Lydia, Gerhardt, the words foreign buyers, the club, the treble clef. His fingers drummed the desk like a muted timpani. "You retrieved tangible proof?" I slid the matchbook across the wood. "That enough to hum a tune?" He examined it, nostrils flaring slightly. "A club emblem. Insufficient but indicative. You insinuated yourself inside." I insinuated, all right. The singer helped. She had a way of... He cut me off with a glare. "Your method relies excessively on female acquiescence." "Sure," I said. "But it yields results," he grunted. "Invariably through impropriety. That's the American way." For a man who weighed 1/7 of a ton, he could move fast when annoyed. The bell cord twitched. Fritz appeared, silent as Swiss regret, and placed a tray of beer and cheese before him. Wolfe poured carefully, as if civilization depended on it. "Miss Vance and Mr. Gerhardt," he said at last, "are conspiring to traffic something, possibly the acetate, possibly information derived from it. You will maintain observation. Mr. Panzer will shadow the conductor." "Gladly. I'm starting to enjoy his baton technique." Wolfe's eyes narrowed. "Do not jest. Murder is already twice committed. I will not have a third complicating my digestion." "Then keep Fritz out of it," I said. He ignored that and reached for his beer. The matter was officially tabled, which in Wolfe's world meant until the next corpse. The next corpse almost obliged. At 1:30 the phone rang. Fritz answered, came back pale. "Mr. Goodwin, it is the police. They ask for you." I took the receiver. Stebbins' voice came through, gravel with fatigue. "Goodwin? That Savinov girl? Elena? Somebody busted up her flat. She's fine, but the place looks like a hurricane with fingerprints. No sign of that record groove thing you mentioned." "The confession?" "Gone." I hung up, gave Wolfe the short version. He set his beer down so gently it was terrifying. "Predictable," he murmured. "While you indulged in cabaret flirtation, our adversaries secured the prize. That's gratitude for you." He pointed a finger, heavy as a verdict. "I did not say your conduct lacked utility. You have exposed the conduit, the club, the buyers, the mechanism. Now we know where the current flows." I leaned against the desk. "You mean we're the light bulb?" "Archie," he said, "kindly retire before I extinguish both your metaphors and your presence. Tomorrow at 10 we resume. I must think." That was my cue for exit. Fritz appeared with Wolfe's coat for the plant rooms, the late-night equivalent of a lullaby. Wolfe rose, majestic and immovable, and pressed the elevator button like a man descending into war. I watched him go, then looked at the matchbook on the desk. The treble clef gleamed faintly in the lamplight. "Music as currency," Wolfe had said. Somebody out there was cashing in. I pocketed it again, switched off the lights, and headed upstairs. The night had turned sour, all right, like jazz played one note too long. If I ever write my memoirs, chapter 18 will be titled "When the Veal Went Cold." It started that afternoon when Lon Cohen's paper hit the stoop, headline fat enough to feed pigeons. "Private Sleuth hides wartime record." Wolfe's name led the column, mine snuck in halfway down, and together we looked like public enemies with good taste in upholstery. Wolfe was already at his desk, the Gazette spread like a bad rash in front of him. "Archie," he said, voice glacial, "Mr. Cohen has published calumny." "True," I said, "but it's well-phrased calumny. He even spelled your name right." He reached for the bell cord with the solemnity of a man launching war. Fritz entered bearing veal à la mode, fragrant enough to raise the dead. Wolfe intoned, "Fritz, cancel my luncheon for tomorrow. I will be indisposed until civilization reasserts itself. That's when the doorbell joined the chorus, long, hard, and familiar. I opened it to find Inspector Kramer in full storm gear, hat jammed low, coat dripping, warrant in one hand, cigar in the other. He looked like law enforcement's answer to Mount Vesuvius. "Afternoon, Goodwin," he said. "Where's your emperor?" "Still ruling from the throne," I told him. "Mind your tone, the veal's listening." He shouldered past me into the office. Wolfe didn't rise. He never does for anything short of Armageddon. Kramer slapped the warrant on the desk. "You're withholding evidence tied to a federal contract. The DA's office wants a search." Wolfe folded his napkin as if concluding a treaty. "If you must trespass, Inspector, do it civilly. Mr. Goodwin will assist." I said, "You'll pardon me if I don't wear an apron." Kramer ignored that, puffing his cigar like it owed him rent. "You've been sitting on a wartime recording that connects a dead composer, a dead PR man, and possibly a defector working out of Manhattan in '44. You think you can pick which secrets get daylight?" Wolfe's eyes half closed. "I think, Inspector, that ignorance is a universal condition and that you are momentarily afflicted." "I can fix that," Kramer barked. "I'll turn this place inside out." He signaled Stebbins, who hovered in the doorway looking apologetic enough to frame. "Go on," Kramer said. "Start with the filing cabinet." I stepped between them. "Careful, Pearlie. The last man who rifled those files still writes his reports in traction." "Archie," Wolfe said, mild as thunder from a distance, "permit the inspector his theatre. We owe him accommodation, not hospitality." Kramer grunted and began a slow orbit of the room. Fritz stood frozen with the serving tray. The smell of veal fought bravely against cigar smoke and lost. After 5 minutes of unproductive rummaging, Kramer slammed a drawer. Nothing. Not a scrap of acetate, not a paper clue. Wolfe dabbed his mouth. "Because, Inspector, what you seek does not exist in this house. The stolen disc's content was not confession but communication, a message, encoded in musical intervals, addressed to a certain operative once stationed here under diplomatic pretense. A defector, perhaps, certainly a fool." Kramer scowled. "You're saying that record was a code transmission?" "Precisely." Wolfe leaned back. "Mr. Savanoff, under the guise of art, recorded instructions for transfer of funds and identities. Someone rediscovered that purpose. Murder followed, as murder follows greed." "Then cough up your proof." "I have inference, not evidence." "Then the DA keeps this warrant open." He jabbed the paper toward me. "And you, Goodwin, you keep your smart mouth shut. The Gazette says you're the courier between Wolfe and half the crooks in town." I gave him my best choirboy smile. "That's unfair. I handle crooks and honest citizens equally." He looked ready to bite the cigar in half. "One of these days, Goodwin." "One of these days," Wolfe interrupted smoothly, "you will realize that antagonism is unprofitable. Mr. Goodwin's indulgences are many, but obstruction of justice is not among them." Kramer's jaw worked. I'd seen it do some heavy lifting before, but this time it could have cracked walnuts. He finally muttered, "You'd better be right." Wolfe inclined his head. "I invariably am." Kramer turned to go, then paused at the door. "If that record shows up, any copy, any fragment, you phone me first, not the Gazette." Wolfe's tone was dry dust. "You have my assurance. The press will not again precede propriety." When the door shut behind them, the silence hummed like a tuning fork. Wolfe exhaled. "Archie, telephone Mr. Cohen. Inform him his access to this establishment is suspended for 1 week." "Lun'll love that. Can I at least tell him why?" "Tell him," Wolfe said, "that falsity, once printed, requires abstinence for digestion." I went to the phone, grinning. "That'll teach him to sell papers. You planning to sue or sulk?" "Neither. We shall wait. The truth, like vinyl, may warp, yet it endures." I hung up and came back. For the record, I preferred the veal unpolitical. "Pfui," he said, pushing the plate toward me. "Eat. I despise waste." So we did, him with serenity, me with appetite, while outside the press trucks rumbled like war drums. Inside, only the clink of forks and the faint rasp of his cigar competed with the ticking clock. When Fritz cleared the dishes, Wolfe finally murmured, "Tomorrow, the chorus will change its tune." "Sure," I said, "but today they're singing in the wrong key." He allowed the smallest of smiles. Then we shall conduct them. And that, as far as afternoons go, was harmony enough. Factories after midnight have a personality all their own, grimy, echoing, and just moral enough to feel ashamed of themselves. The Queen's pressing plant sat on a block where every window was cracked and every cat had a limp. Saul Pantzer's tip had led me there, a warehouse that smelled like hot metal and bad decisions. Inside, a record press thudded rhythmically, the sound of music being strangled into plastic. I flashed my license to the night foreman, a bony man with nicotine fingers and the conscience of a slot machine. His name tag read Ray, though I'd have bet against it. "Saul said you'd talk," I began. "He said you'd even tell the truth if bribed appropriately." Ray's mouth twitched. "Saul said that, huh? Sounds like him. You cops?" "Private sector," I said. "The kind that pays on delivery and tips for charm." He eyed me like a man weighing the resale value of his soul. "What do you want to know?" "A certain composer named Nikolai Savinov. A couple of weeks back, somebody brought in an acetate master with his name on it. You pressed test copies." He hesitated, then shrugged. "Could be. Lot of classical junk goes through. What's your angle?" "Curiosity. It's a paying hobby." He rubbed his palms on a rag. 3 test copies, yeah. 1 for Silvertone, 1 tagged for US Information Office. The 3rd got lost." "Lost how?" "Walked out. Collector type. Foreign. Paid cash." "Name?" He pulled a ledger from the desk drawer, pages smudged with graphite and gilt, and flipped it open. Under the date I found 3 neat lines, Savinov Overture NS. Then beside it the initials LV and a notation in red pencil, Foreign remit, paid. "LV," I said. "Lydia Vance." Ray licked his lips. "Could be. Lady handled herself like she'd bought the joint." I snapped the ledger shut. "She might have bought more than that," he scowled. "Hey, this was just a side job. Couple bills to keep the lights on. And maybe a murder or 2 to keep the story interesting." He stiffened. "I didn't kill nobody." "Good," I said. "That saves me paperwork." I left him sweating over his conscience and stepped into the main floor. The machinery loomed like steel monsters. Presses, moulds, bins full of black discs glinting under the low lamps. A worker in coveralls watched me pass with the wary look of a man who'd seen too many detectives and too few pay raises. My pocket buzzed. The brownstone number. I found a quiet corner between stacks of lacquer blanks and answered. "Goodwin," I said. "Archie." Wolfe's voice carried the calm of a man addressing lesser species. "Where are you?" "At a pressing plant in Queens. It's got atmosphere, grime, and a foreman who knows the going rate of treason." "You will cease this melodramatic prowling," he said, "then stop sending me to melodramatic places. I sent you to observe, not to trespass amid industrial detritus. Report." I gave him the highlights, the 3 copies, the ledger, the initials. I could practically hear him frowning through the line. "So," he said slowly, "Miss Vance financed an illicit reproduction. The 3rd copy was diverted to a buyer. That implies motive, concealment or leverage. Both are fatal in their turn." "Yeah," I said. "Fatal's been the theme." He inhaled. "Return at once. And Archie, avoid heroics." "I'll do my best, but the crowd here expects an encore." He hung up with the kind of finality that ought to come with a curtain drop. On my way out, a figure blocked the door, a bulky shadow in a cheap overcoat. The man had the calm of someone waiting for a bus, except the bulge under his arm wasn't a newspaper. "You Goodwin?" he asked. "I've been accused." He smiled faintly. "Then you've been told to mind your own record." "That's catchy," I said. "You write jingles on the side?" His hand moved, and I saw the gun. It wasn't pointed yet, but it was enthusiastic. I stayed still. "Forget the copy," he said. "It's gone." "Sure," I said, "and you're just here to make sure I get my 8 hours sleep." He didn't answer, which was confirmation enough. I took a slow step closer, keeping my voice light. "You one of Lydia's foreign buyers, or just freelancing patriotism?" He hesitated. Wrong move. I slammed the nearby light switch, plunging us into half-darkness, and dove behind a crate. The gun barked once, twice. A press exploded in a shower of sparks. I lobbed a wrench from the floor in the opposite direction. He cursed and ran. By the time I reached the exit, the street was empty except for the echo of tires. I stood there, brushing oil from my coat, and decided I'd had enough culture for the evening. The cab ride back to West 35th was silent except for the driver's radio crooning something about heartbreak. Appropriate. Inside the brownstone, Fritz was clearing away dinner plates. Wolfe was behind his desk, surrounded by his yellow notepads, as composed as a Buddha reviewing tax forms. He looked up as I entered, took in the smudge on my sleeve, and sighed. You have been engaged in undignified exertion. Somebody tried to persuade me to quit the case with lead argumentation. His brow lifted. You're unhurt? Mostly. One record press won't be making Broadway cast albums anytime soon. He tapped his pen against the blotter, described the assailant. Medium height, heavy-set, foreign accent. East European, I'd bet. Could be our Cornell from earlier. Possible, he murmured. Our collector, therefore, remains at large and armed. Add ambitious and lousy with aim. He considered that, then said, The ledger entry confirms Miss Vance's duplicity. She financed a third pressing to ensure control over Savanov's message. When Rusk attempted to exploit it, he was silenced. I sat, stretching my legs. And the buyer with the gun wants to make sure nobody ever plays the tune again. Indeed. Wolfe leaned back, fingertips joined. Duplicity, Archie, is like the gramophone. It reproduces endlessly, each copy fainter than the first, yet still capable of noise. That's poetry, I said. You planning to publish or just hum it at the trial? He ignored me. We are nearing resolution. Tomorrow we shall summon them, the lady, the conductor, the daughter. Truth, like vinyl, must be pressed under pressure to reveal its groove. Fine, I said. But if it's all the same to you, I'd like to skip the factory soundtrack next time. Phooey, he said, waving me off. Go cleanse yourself. You smell of industry. Better than politics, I said, heading for the stairs. Behind me, I heard the faint pop of a beer bottle opening, civilization restored. The case was closing in like a needle to a groove, and I had a feeling when it reached the end, the tune wouldn't be pretty. We didn't leave it to metaphor. The next morning, Saul phoned in at 10 sharp. He'd traced our collector to a shabby furnished room on 92nd, light on furniture and heavy on bad cigarettes. The man was gone, but he'd been careless. One test pressing of the Savanov side was still hidden under a dresser board. Saul brought it straight over. We didn't play genius. We sent it to a lab Cohen's people vouched for. By late afternoon, the report came back. No tampering, and buried in the last groove under the noise, a human voice. That was all Wolfe needed. He told me to set the chairs and invite our guests. If Manhattan penthouses were built to impress the angels, this one had missed by a few floors. Lydia Vance's Fifth Avenue spread looked like the inside of a grand piano. Black lacquer, silver trim, and not a note of warmth anywhere. The kind of place where you took off your hat, but not your suspicion. It was close to 11 when I walked in, Saul's call still echoing in my head. Lydia had phoned, voice brittle as spun glass, asking me to come for clarity. When a woman says she wants clarity, she usually means company. The elevator doors opened directly into her living room, a stage set for regret. Floor-to-ceiling windows gave a view of the park lights, blurred by drizzle. A grand piano stood center stage like a black coffin with better acoustics. I took 3 steps in and saw her, Lydia, standing by the bar, shaking as she poured herself something amber. Her usual polish was cracked. Even the pearls around her neck looked nervous. "You're late," she said. "Traffic," I told her, "and homicide investigations. They're both slow this time of night." She tried for a smile. "Do you always bring irony to an inquest?" "It travels lighter than luggage. Where's Gerhardt?" "Here," said a voice behind me. The conductor came from the hallway, his tux jacket unbuttoned, bow tie hanging like a surrender flag. His eyes were too bright, the kind that saw ghosts or headlines. He looked at me the way a man looks at a locked door. "This is absurd," he said. "You think we—" "I think plenty," I said. "Let's see what sticks." I moved to the piano, rested one hand on the polished lid. "Let's start simple." There were 3 copies of Savanov's record. One went to Silvertone, one to Uncle Sam, one to the highest bidder. Which of you held the auction? Lydia set her glass down hard enough to wake the dead composer. "I told you. I didn't know about the 3rd copy until yesterday." "Sure," I said. and Rusk cut his own throat with a phonograph needle. Her eyes flared. You think I killed him? I think you financed him. I think when he wanted a bigger slice, somebody decided to cut costs. Gerhardt's hand clenched into a fist. You can't talk to her like that. I turned to him. Then you try it. Maybe she'll confess faster. That hit something. Lydia's chin trembled, the silence stretched. I was about to push again when she said, very quietly, All right, enough. You want the truth? Yes, I sold 1 acetate. Gerhardt's head whipped toward her. Lydia. She ignored him. I had no choice. Silvertone was bankrupt. The creditors were waiting. A collector approached me, offered $10,000 for 1 copy unplayed. I thought it was harmless. A piece of music, art. And now, I asked. Now 2 men are dead, and I'm... She stopped, catching her breath. I didn't kill anyone, Mr. Goodwin. Then you've got lousy timing and worse friends. She gave a small, bitter laugh. True enough. Gerhardt began pacing. You shouldn't have told him anything. She already did, I said. So unless you've got something better than moral outrage, sit down. He didn't. Instead, he headed toward the hallway, muttering something about needing air. I followed a step, not enough to spook him. Outside, the night wind came through a cracked window, humming against the glass panes. Somewhere below, traffic sighed like a weary city. Lydia turned away, pressing a hand to her forehead. It's all collapsing, she whispered. Everything. I took out my notebook. Let's keep it upright a few more minutes. This collector, did he have a name? She hesitated. Cornell. He said he was Hungarian. He wore gloves. Always. That fit the silhouette from the pressing plant nicely. I was about to ask more when Gerhardt shouted from the hallway, Enough of this! I'm done being accused! Then the sound came. Sharp, metallic, final. A single shot. Lydia screamed. I ran. The front door hung open to the corridor. Gerhardt lay half in, half out, sprawled against the wall, his eyes wide with disbelief. The smell of gunpowder bit the air. Down the hallway, footsteps pounded, then vanished into the stairwell. I knelt beside him, pulse gone. The blood was spreading across marble tile, dark and ugly. Beside him, glinting under the light, was the shell casing. I picked it up carefully in my handkerchief. A neat, circular logo was stamped on the brass. Silvertone Studio. Somebody had just signed their work. I went back in. Lydia was on the floor, clutching the arm of the sofa like it was the last solid thing in the world. Her lipstick had vanished. Her face looked washed clean of everything but shock. He's dead? She asked. Yeah, I said. Whatever encore he planned got cancelled. Her eyes darted toward the window. Who did it? That's the $64,000 question. You heard the shot. Did you see anything? No, she shivered. There was wind and then... I cut her off gently. Okay, sit tight. Police will want a statement. Police? She went pale. But Relax. You're not going anywhere tonight except the headlines. I'll call Wolfe. I used the apartment's phone, keeping my voice low. Fritz answered, sounding startled that anyone dared interrupt the master past 10. Mr. Wolfe is occupied, he said stiffly. Tell him Goodwin, emergency tempo allegro. There was a pause, then Wolfe's voice came on, heavy with sleep and indignation. Archie, this had better not be. It's murder again, I said. Gerhardt just took a bow without getting up. A long exhale. You are uninjured? For the moment. I've got a casing marked with Silvertone's logo. Pfui, the audacity. He paused. Stay there. The police will come. They must. You will not, repeat, not indulge in heroics. Cross my heart, I said, though at this point that's not reassuring. By the time Kramer and his boys arrived, the place looked like a publicity still from the naked city. Flashbulbs, fingerprints, the works. Stebbins cornered me first, expression grim. You again. You got a season pass for murder scenes? Only the classy ones, I said. This one comes with champagne and remorse. Kramer joined us, cigar clamped like it owed him money. He took one look at Gerhardt, then at me. You were here when it happened? Inside the room. Heard the shot, ran out, found him like that. He grunted. And the lady? In shock. Might have seen the shooter if she'd been looking the right way. Which she wasn't, Kramer muttered. Figures. He bent, studied the body, then stood. "All right. Nobody leaves till we check ballistics." I handed him the handkerchief-wrapped casing. "You'll like this one, it's branded." He frowned, squinting. "Silvertone Studios. Cute." "Yeah," I said. "Their PR department's really branching out." He pocketed it and looked at me again, half accusation, half weariness. "You sure you didn't bring the trouble with you?" "Only my charm." "Then get out of my way and let the lab boys do their jobs." I watched them work while Lydia sat silent, pale as her pearls. When they finally led her out for questioning, she didn't look at me. Maybe she couldn't, maybe she shouldn't. By the time I got back to the brownstone, it was after 1. The orchids were long asleep, but Wolfe wasn't. The elevator hummed as he descended, wrapped in his robe, eyes sharp as razors. Fritz had laid out a midnight snack, cheese, beer, and disapproval. Wolfe didn't speak until I finished my report. Then he leaned back, steepling his fingers. So, the conductor silenced, the woman hysterical, and our adversary emboldened. More or less. "And you," he said, "once again at the epicenter of calamity." "I didn't schedule it." "Your initiative courts peril. Were I given to sentiment, I should say you have risked too much for music." He paused, eyes glinting. "Fortunately, I am not." "That's comforting," I said. "You sound like a man reading my obituary." "Pfui, you are resilient, annoyingly so." He reached for his notebook, then stopped, looking at me with something that almost qualified as concern. "You are certain you were not followed?" "Pretty sure. If anyone tailed me, they got bored halfway across the bridge." He nodded slowly, satisfied but not happy. "Go upstairs. Rest. I shall remain. There are details to reconcile." I stared. "You, awake past 11? Call the Gazette." He ignored the joke, already jotting on his pad. "The casing's logo signifies our murderer's arrogance, or his proximity to Silvertone. Tomorrow, the curtain will fall. Until then, sleep." I started for the door, then turned back. For the record, I don't like seeing people shot 2 steps away, especially not when I'm trying to prove who isn't guilty. He looked up. "You are not accustomed to futility, Archie. Neither am I, but endurance too is a weapon." That was Wolfe's version of comfort. I left him with his notes and his beer, the lamplight gilding his broad face. The city outside was still awake, restless and unmusical. Upstairs, I took off my coat, found a scratch on my sleeve, and decided it didn't matter. Somewhere in that maze of money, propaganda, and dead men, somebody had been playing the wrong note, and I intended to change the tune. If you've never watched Nero Wolfe prepare for battle, imagine a mountain studying its own weather. He sat behind his desk that evening with the stillness of tectonic patience, fingers steepled, eyes half closed. The office smelled faintly of cigar smoke, orchids, and Fritz's veal broth sneaking in from the kitchen. The clock read 7:30. The showdown crowd was due at 8. I'd spent the last hour aligning chairs like pews before Judgment Day. Wolfe insisted on order. 4 seats before the desk, equal distance, no diagonals. "A man's guilt," he once said, "is best revealed in symmetry." By the time the doorbell rang, Fritz had polished the silver tray for post-battle beer, and I was ready to referee a polite riot. The first through the door was Inspector Kramer, cigar clenched like an accusation. He muttered, "This better not be another of your melodramas, Wolfe." I left a stack of reports cooling on my desk. "Then this," Wolfe said without opening his eyes, "will warm you." Kramer grunted and took his usual chair, the one that squeaked. Behind him came Lydia Vance, pale as a swan in mourning, and Elena Savanoff, smaller, tightly wound, wearing her father's grief like armour. Saul Panzer slipped in last, hat in hand, quiet as an apology. Wolfe opened his eyes and nodded once. "We are complete." "Not quite," I said. "You're forgetting the lady from Silvertone, Miss Field." A crisp voice floated from the doorway. "I'm here, Mr. Goodwin." Diana Field entered in a grey suit that could have passed inspection at the War Department. Tailored, perfect, sterile. Her smile was the professional kind, straight, white, and evacuated of feeling. She took the last seat, crossing her legs neatly. Wolfe surveyed them like a conductor before the downbeat. "Ladies, gentlemen, the business that has brought us together has produced 3 deaths, 1 scandal, and an intolerable intrusion into my routine. I intend to terminate it." Kramer snorted. "You mean solve it?" "If you prefer vulgar brevity, yes." He leaned forward. "You claim you've got proof who killed Rusk and Gerhardt?" "I have," Wolfe said. "And why?" Lydia Vance let out a shaky breath. "Then please, Mr. Wolfe, tell us. I can't endure any more suspicion." "You endure it because you earned it," Wolfe replied, not unkindly. "But not the guilt. The guilt lies elsewhere." He gestured for me to dim the lamps near the phonograph. The machine gleamed on the side table, a black lacquer relic with brass fittings that caught the low light like gold teeth. Beside it lay a record in a paper sleeve. Wolfe spoke with deliberate weight. "This disc, as you know, is not Savanoff's original acetate. That was destroyed. This is a re-recording Mr. Goodwin and Mr. Panzer recovered from a secondary source. You may recall, Inspector, the third test copy." Kramer grunted again, the universal police dialect for "go on." Wolfe continued. "It was assumed the record's value lay in music, a symphony, a confession, perhaps propaganda. In fact, it contained espionage. Savanoff, conscripted during the war to compose patriotic works, also served unwillingly as courier for coded messages to a foreign handler." Elena Savanoff whispered. "My father? No." "Your father repented," Wolfe said. "His final act was to encode a confession within his composition, a message naming the agent who exploited him. The message was not in the melody, but in the over-modulated final groove, a spoken fragment." He lifted the record gently, like evidence in a museum. "Mr. Goodwin, the switch, please." I set the needle, flipped the lever. The room filled with static, then with a voice, male, tremulous, Slavic, ghostly through the hiss. "I speak for my soul. The one who used me is Diana Feld, correspondent. She is the ear that hears for the East." The groove crackled to silence. For a long second no one moved. Then Diana Field laughed. Short, sharp, wrong. "Ridiculous," she said. "A hoax. You manufactured that." "Nonsense," Wolfe said. "Savanoff names Diana Feld, F-E-L-D. The name you used as a foreign correspondent before you softened it to Field for American ears. The alias convicts you, Miss Field, not absolves you." "Mr. Panzer delivered a copy this afternoon. Their technician verified the mechanical authenticity of the voice imprint. It is Savanoff's beyond question." Kramer's head jerked toward her. "We can check that. The lab—" "Already has," Wolfe interrupted. Diana's face drained to porcelain. "You can't prove when it was recorded." "Pfui! You have no alibi for the engineer's death. You had opportunity to steal the record, motive to silence Rusk when he recognized your voice from his so-called journalist with the accent. You posed as foreign press, Miss Field, a clever disguise for a courier." She rose abruptly. "That's absurd. Why would I kill Gerhardt?" "Because," Wolfe said, "he panicked after hearing the fragment you failed to retrieve. You could not allow him to expose your true employer. You followed and shot him with a pistol bearing Silvertone's studio mark. Convenient, since you had access to their props department." Kramer's eyes narrowed. "That casing we found. Hell, Wolfe, it fits." Diana's gaze flicked to the phonograph, then to the door, measuring. "You're all mad." Eleanor Savanoff stood, trembling. "My father trusted you. You told him it was for peace." "I told him what he needed to hear," Diana snapped, accent slipping into something metallic and Eastern. "He was weak. You all are." Kramer was already on his feet. "Sit down, Miss Field." But she didn't. She lunged, straight for the phonograph. I moved first, but she was fast. The record was halfway off the spindle when Kramer's arm hooked around her. The two crashed into the desk, scattering Wolfe's note cards like startled pigeons. The record slipped from her grasp and rolled, unharmed, under the radiator. "Let me go," she spat. Kramer wrestled her upright, breath harsh. "You're under arrest." Wolfe tugged his vest into alignment. "Kindly remove her from my premises before she damages the furniture." Stebbins appeared in the doorway. How the man always materializes at the perfect moment is one of life's minor tragedies, and took custody. Diana glared once around the room, eyes hard, and was gone. Silence. Only the faint hum of the phonograph motor remained. Elena Savanoff sank back into her chair, face hidden in her hands. Lydia Vance exhaled shakily. So it was her, all this time. Yes, Wolfe said. Miss Field exploited patriotism and art for profit, a common disease. Kramer brushed dust off his sleeve. All right, Wolfe, I'll say it. You called it right. I grinned. That's almost a compliment. He ignored me, relighting his cigar. For once, he didn't curse when the match flared. Maybe respect, maybe exhaustion. Either way, it was history. Wolfe leaned back, eyes closing. Mr. Goodwin, record the summary for my files. Case concluded. Subject espionage. Category oral detritus. I sat at the typewriter and started the rhythmic clatter. Case of the Savinov record. Final report. The words looked neat enough to forget the blood behind them. Elena rose unsteadily. Mr. Wolfe, thank you for clearing my father's name. Wolfe inclined his head. Your father's music, madam, was sound. His conscience ultimately was also sound. The rest is noise. She managed a faint smile, murmured her thanks, and left with Lydia, who walked as though gravity had been restored to her world. Saul followed to see them out. When the door closed, I turned in my chair. You know, for a guy who hates melodrama, you sure stage it like Broadway. He opened one eye. It was necessity. The phonograph possesses an eloquence even fools respect. Yeah, I said, especially when it talks back from the dead. He made a face. Spare me your necromantic quips. At that moment, Fritz appeared, immaculate as ever. Dinner is served, gentlemen. Kramer rose with a grunt. I'll skip the table service. I've got paperwork and a headache waiting. He paused by the door, looked back. For what it's worth, Wolfe, good work. Wolfe inclined his head a fraction. Inspector. Kramer hesitated, struck a match and lit his cigar without muttering a single profanity. For him, that was practically affection. He left, door closing with a sigh that sounded like peace. Wolfe exhaled. A remarkable man when not speaking. I stood, stretched. So, boss, what's on the menu? Veal à la mode. Fritz insists upon a reprise. Appropriate. Tonight had plenty of repeats. He ignored me, as usual, and signalled Fritz for the beer. When the chilled glass landed, he raised it in a silent toast to no one in particular. You know, I said, you could show a little emotion. 3 murders solved, 1 spy unmasked, Kramer almost polite. That's a full symphony right there. Phooey. It was cacophony. Still, you played the right notes. Accident, he said. And patience. I grinned. Fine, but for Christmas I'm getting you a jukebox. Save us both some trouble. His eyes half opened, deadly. Archie. Yeah? Phooey. That closed the curtain. Fritz collected the tray and vanished toward the dining room. Wolfe reached for another slice of bread, the picture of serenity restored. I finished typing the last line of the report, pulled the sheet from the machine, and read it aloud. Case terminated. Truth recovered. Music silenced. Wolfe approved with a nod. File it. I slid it into the drawer, switched off the lamp, and stood by the window. Outside, the city was tuning up again. Car horns, night wind, 1,000 anonymous footsteps keeping time. Behind me, Wolfe's voice drifted, already softened by the prospect of dinner. You may lock the door, Archie. Our recital is concluded. Sure, I said, turning the key. He took his beer in both hands, eyes closing in the ritual of appetite. I watched him a moment, thinking how the man could dissect treason before dessert and still call it digestion. As I crossed to shut off the phonograph, I caught my reflection in its lacquered lid, faint, doubled, like 2 versions of the same tune. One of them whistled, low and off-key, and that's when it hit me. The title we'd been living through. The night I burned my own record, not in vinyl but in memory, because some tunes, once played, echo forever. I turned out the lights.